Let me be direct with you right now because nobody else in the media landscape seems willing to say this clearly. Putin's land bridge to Crimea, the most critical supply artery for Russia's most prized geopolitical trophy, is under attack, and Russia is losing that fight. The M14 highway, a 600-kilometer road corridor running through Mariupol, Berdyansk, and Melitopol straight into occupied Crimea. Not one of several supply options. The option. The irreplaceable backbone of Russia's military occupation of the Black Sea Peninsula. And right now, Ukrainian drones have sections of that road under fire control. Convoys are being struck. Supply chains are fracturing. The military infrastructure sustaining Russia's grip on Crimea is being systematically dismantled. Not in a Hollywood blaze of frontal assault, but methodically, surgically, and with a precision that should have every defense analyst in Washington sitting up straight. Today, I want to walk you through exactly how Ukraine is strangling Crimea without launching a single major ground offensive, and why every person following this war needs to understand what is happening right now in Zaporizhzhia. If you are new to Echo Media, subscribe now and turn on notifications. This is the kind of strategic analysis that gets buried under political theater, and you being here matters. Start with the geography because you cannot understand this campaign without understanding the ground. Crimea is a peninsula jutting into the Black Sea. Russia seized it illegally in 2014. Since that moment, Moscow has faced one fundamental problem. How do you keep a peninsula supplied, armed, and militarily sustained when the country it used to connect to has become your enemy? Two answers emerged. The Kerch Bridge, a massive crossing linking Crimea to Russian-controlled territory across the strait, and the M14, the land corridor through occupied southern Ukraine. Together, these were the circulatory system of the occupation. Troops, ammunition, fuel, air defense batteries, missile systems, replacement parts, medical supplies. Everything Russia needs to hold Crimea flows through one of those two routes. But here is what Western media has consistently failed to say clearly enough. The Kerch Bridge has been struck multiple times. Its capacity is reduced. It is not a reliable high-volume supply route anymore. Which means the M14 is not doing some of the work. It is doing essentially all of it. And Ukraine has now brought sections of that road under drone fire control. Fire control. Let me be precise about what that phrase means operationally. It does not mean Ukraine has physically blocked the road. It means Ukraine has made the road dangerous. Convoys are being struck. Every Russian truck driver operating that corridor now knows his vehicle could be targeted at any moment. Every logistics officer planning a supply run has to treat it as a combat mission. Additional escort vehicles, electronic warfare assets, timing windows, route variation, all of it adds cost, time, and complexity to what used to be a routine delivery operation. And the cascading effect of that, across days, across weeks, across months, is operationally devastating at every level downstream. Less fuel at the front, fewer artillery rounds arriving complete, air defense batteries that cannot reposition quickly because moving them openly on the M14 is too dangerous. The road does not have to be physically destroyed to collapse operationally. It just has to be disrupted enough and often enough. And Ukraine is achieving exactly that at scale, using drones that cost a few $1,000s to strike systems and convoys worth millions. The Institute for the Study of War confirmed in its May 9th assessment that Ukrainian forces are conducting effective strikes more than 100 kilometers deep into areas that Russia had previously considered secure rear territory. The Russian concept of a protected rear zone, where logistics flow freely, where troops rotate, where equipment is staged, no longer exists in southern Ukraine. Ukrainian drone capability has eliminated it. Now let me tell you what happened in January and February of 2026, because this is where the current phase of the story begins, and it is not the story Russia wanted to tell. Russian forces launched what they framed as successful deep penetrations into the Zaporizhzhia region, pushing towards settlements like Vasilivka. They achieved small gains. Russian military bloggers, the Zed bloggers who function as the Kremlin's unofficial crowdsourced propaganda network, erupted in celebration. Russia was advancing. The buffer zone was expanding. Zaporizhzhia was going to fall. That was the narrative. And like most Russian military narratives since February 2022, it was wrong. Ukraine counterattacked. The Ukrainian General Staff pulled the 153rd Mechanized Brigade out of Kherson and redeployed it to reinforce the 128th Mountain Assault Brigade along the Stepove-Mali-Sherbaki axis. Ukraine's Military Intelligence Special Forces, the GUR's most experienced operators, were directed toward the critical terrain. When a country deploys its best special operations personnel to a specific axis, it is signaling that this terrain matters enough to spend its most capable people on it. Since January 2026 alone, Ukraine has recaptured approximately 65 square kilometers in the Zaporizhzhia direction. That is not a skirmish. That is a sustained, grinding reversal of Russian gains by a force that was supposed to be on its back foot. Stebneve, a town roughly 25 kilometers south of Zaporizhzhia city, has become one of the most intense battles on the entire front. Russia needs it as a platform to advance northward. It has poured VDV airborne brigades and Marine Corps units hastily redirected from the Donetsk front into this fight. After months of intensive operations, Russia has failed to meaningfully advance. Ukrainian forces have made significant progress in the town's center and northern sectors. But here is where the story becomes genuinely remarkable from a strategic perspective. Because while Russia was focused on Stebneve, while its entire surveillance apparatus was watching the obvious front line, Ukraine was preparing something else entirely. Something so tightly classified that in a brigade of over 2,000 soldiers, only approximately 10 people knew it was coming. 10 people in a force of thousands. Think about what that means in this particular war. This is not a 20th century conflict where you can mass forces behind a ridgeline under cover of darkness. Every field, every road, every trench is being monitored by drones, Russian, Ukrainian, commercial satellites, military reconnaissance. The battlefield is transparent in ways no previous generation of soldiers has experienced. And in that environment, the ability to conceal not just movement but intent, not just troops but plan, is the single most decisive military advantage that exists. Ukraine achieved that concealment before a single soldier moved. Ukrainian forces spent weeks systematically neutralizing Russian artillery first. Approximately 150 Russian artillery pieces were identified and suppressed along a roughly 30-kilometer stretch before the ground assault began. Artillery operations and drone strikes worked in coordinated sequences. Even the weather cooperated. Fog concealed Ukrainian movements from overhead observation. And then the assault began. Russian commanders discovered Ukrainian units materializing behind their lines. Not at the front, behind it. According to Ukrainian commanders, Russian forces believed the initiative was still theirs until attacking units appeared in their rear. Russia had drones in the sky. Russia had surveillance watching that sector. It still did not see what was coming. Because visibility is not understanding. And Ukraine has learned to exploit the gap between what Russia can observe and what Russia can actually comprehend, with devastating and consistent effect. But the ground gains in Zaporizhzhia, significant as they are the supporting act. Let me tell you what the real strategic story is, because this is the part that has Russian military bloggers openly panicking, and it deserves your full attention. On the night of May 5th to 6th, Ukraine demonstrated exactly what it intends to do to the far end of the M14 corridor. Drone strikes hit targets near Dzhankoi in occupied Crimea. An S-400 launcher, a premier Russian air defense system worth hundreds of millions of dollars, was struck. 2 mobile fire group vehicles were destroyed. 1 Russian soldier killed, 10 wounded at that location alone. But the main strike targeted the Dzhankoi railway junction. 5 Russian soldiers killed, 5 wounded, a locomotive destroyed, multiple freight cars damaged. And Dzhankoi is not just a train station. It is the central distribution hub of Crimea's entire railway network. The vast majority of rail traffic coming from the Russian mainland via the Kerch Bridge arrives at Dzhankoi and gets routed from there to Sevastopol, to Simferopol, to coastal military bases across the peninsula. Destroy the junction and you do not damage one delivery. You paralyze the entire distribution system for days, sometimes weeks, while repairs are made and alternative routing is established. A single destroyed locomotive causes scheduling delays that cascade across every train behind it. Ukraine is not just hitting the road to Crimea, it is hitting the point where the road ends. Now let me give you the strategic framework that ties all of this together, because without the framework, you have an impressive collection of facts and no way to understand what they add up to. What Ukraine is executing in the Zaporizhzhia Crimea theater is a textbook three-phase blockade strategy, being implemented with a discipline and precision that is genuinely remarkable for a country fighting a full-scale war of survival on limited resources. Retired U.S. General Ben Hodges, one of the most respected voices in Western strategic analysis, has described this model explicitly. Phase 1 is isolation. Cut the supply lines, make logistics untenable, force the adversary to spend its best military assets defending infrastructure instead of advancing strategic objectives. This phase is active right now. It is measurable. Ukrainian drones are striking more than 100 kilometers behind the front. The M14 is under fire control. The T-0509 highway is under drone surveillance. The Kerch Bridge is damaged and at limited capacity. The Dzhankoi junction has been struck. Phase 1 is not a plan. It is a present reality with documented, verifiable outcomes. Phase 2 is making the situation militarily and economically unacceptable, driving costs beyond what the occupying power can absorb politically and financially, multiplying the burden on a defense budget already stretched across a 1,000-kilometer front, forcing the Kremlin to choose between continuing an occupation that bleeds it dry and accepting a negotiated position that acknowledges the failure of its military ambition. Phase 2 begins the moment Phase 1 has sufficiently degraded Russian logistics and morale. The trajectory of Phase 1 suggests that transition is closer than most Western analysts are publicly acknowledging. Phase 3 is liberation, which in this model does not require a dramatic amphibious assault on Crimean beaches or a full-scale ground offensive across heavily defended terrain. It requires Phases 1 and 2 to have done their work thoroughly enough that the cost of continued Russian occupation exceeds the Kremlin's political will to sustain it. General Hodges stated it directly. There is no need for a frontal assault on Crimea. Cut off the logistics and let time take care of the rest. Russia is also confronting something that receives almost no serious coverage in the Western press. The domestic political dimension of this logistics story. The narrative that everything is under control is cracking under the weight of observable reality. Russia's own Zed bloggers, the Kremlin's informal propaganda infrastructure, the crowdsourced cheerleading network that Russian military nationalists depend on for morale, are openly discussing logistical paralysis in the rear. They are posting about security vulnerabilities along the M14. They are acknowledging the inadequacy of Russian electronic warfare against Ukrainian drone swarms. These are not Ukrainian sources making these observations. These are Russian sources speaking to Russian audiences, admitting that the rear is not secure, that convoys are being struck, that the land bridge to Crimea is under serious threat. Combined with war fatigue approaching 3 years of sustained conflict, with economic pressure from sanctions and oil price volatility, with the pervasive fear of another mobilization wave, this is a genuinely dangerous mixture for the Putin regime's domestic stability. And consider what Putin's recent rhetoric actually reveals. He has made public statements suggesting the war is approaching its conclusion. Western media has covered these statements with cautious optimism that makes any serious analyst question what they are reading. Because here is what Kremlin peace rhetoric means when you strip away the diplomatic framing and look at the battlefield facts. It means Russia's offensive momentum has stalled. It means casualties are at levels the Kremlin is struggling to absorb and conceal. It means Ukraine's deep strike capability is reaching infrastructure inside Russia that Moscow believed was safely beyond range. Oil refineries, military airfields, naval vessels. Ukrainian forces struck Su-57 and Su-34 aircraft at the Shogol airfield in Chelyabinsk, 1,700 kilometers inside Russian territory. A Kerch-class missile ship was struck at Primorsko-Akhtarsk. The Russian concept of a safe rear is gone, and it means the pressure on the M14 land bridge, the pressure on Crimea's supply lines, is forcing Putin to calculate whether this war remains winnable at a price he can politically survive. But words are not policy. Kremlin advisor Ushakov has stated explicitly that progress in any peace process will stall unless Ukraine withdraws from Donbas territory that Russia has not even fully seized militarily. Russia is demanding at the negotiating table what it cannot consolidate on the battlefield. That tells you everything about who holds the leverage in this conflict right now. A military genuinely winning does not negotiate. It advances until it achieves its objectives. The fact that Moscow is simultaneously talking about peace and issuing territorial demands it cannot enforce militarily tells you that the pressure Ukraine is applying is working. Here is the bottom line. And hear this clearly because this is precisely what the mainstream narrative consistently fails to deliver. What Ukraine is doing in Zaporizhzhia and along the M14 corridor is not a desperate last stand. It is not the effort of an exhausted military scraping the bottom of its resources. It is a sophisticated, coordinated, strategically coherent campaign to strangle Crimea without firing a shot at its beaches. And it is working. The land bridge is bleeding. The Dzhankoi junction has been struck. The M14 is under fire control. The Kerch Bridge, already damaged, already at limited capacity, is the last major supply artery standing. And Ukraine has explicitly stated its intention to target it when the operational moment arrives. This is not a frozen conflict drifting toward inevitable Russian victory. This is phase one of a blockade model producing measurable, verifiable results that should fundamentally reshape the conversation in every Western capital about what the end of this war actually looks like. If this analysis gave you something the mainstream missed, like this video, share it right now with someone who only follows the surface-level coverage of this war. Subscribe to Echo Media and turn on notifications. The analysis that explains what is actually happening will be here the moment it does. Drop your assessment below. What do you think the breaking point is for Russia's hold on Crimea? I read every comment, and the conversation here matters.